It is a busy time at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, but our Torah this week is reflective of that because it's a busy time for the Jewish people in general. So let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu melech
Elohim
haolam
Asher
asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav
Mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
Asok
divrei Torah.
Torah. Amen.
I love that Zoom cacophony. It's so great. So a little bit of background before we look at the bit of Torah that we're actually going to look at today. This Shabbat is one of a handful of Shabbats over the course of the year that has a name for it, right? So that when there's a handful of Shabbats over the course of the year that have names, and they're named because of their time in, they're named because they're connected to something on the calendar, and therefore there is a special Torah, what's called a maftir, an additional Torah reading connected to it. So what's coming up on the calendar besides the installation on Sunday? What's coming up on the calendar?
Purim.
Purim. I love that. And you were all much slower than the preschoolers I just came from, who, when I said what's coming up, and they know Purim is coming. And what's amazing about this, that I do think ties right into our study today, is that for good reason, kids love Purim. And we love to make Purim for the kids because everybody should have these positive memories associated with Purim. It's great. And for those of you who know, and this is a pretty learned group, you know that the story of Purim is actually a very adult story. So with all of that in mind, because Purim is around the corner, this Shabbat is called Shabbat Zachor. Zachor is memory. It's the Shabbat of memory or remembrance, the Shabbat of remembrance. And we're about to look at the just few little Torah verses that are added to the regular, they're out of order, right? There is the regular Torah portion, and we'll get to a few verses from the regular Torah portion late at the end. But this is special. The verses that are added are actually from the book of Deuteronomy. So we're in the middle of the book of Exodus. So flip ahead to the very end. And as background, remember, Deuteronomy is a retelling of the adventures, if you want to put it that way, of the Israelites while they're wandering through the wilderness. So here, we're going to look at the very first word, and you will know why this is called Shabbat Zachor. Oh no, where is it? I opened a separate thing, so it would be nice and easy for you. Hold on a second. It's not, give me 1 second. Technical difficulties here. Okay, I apologize. You're going to have to look at all of my open tabs. I made a separate thing so you wouldn't have to, but that's okay. It's not popping up. Try again. I think this is it. Yeah. Okay. Ignore the tabs. All right. This is our special Torah reading from, I did, Deuteronomy chapter 25. So again, recounting what had already gone on. Remember, Zachor, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. I'm going to read it and then we'll go back and talk about it. How, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when your God, Adonai, grants you safety from all your enemies around you, and the land that your God, Adonai, is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. Do not forget. Okay, we're going to come back in particular to that last verse, but let's just try and unpack who Amalek is and what Amalek did. So remember, Zachor, that is the first word. This is Shabbat Zachor. This is the Shabbat to remember. What did Amalek do? Even if you don't remember, but it just said it. What did Amalek do that was so terrible? Hi, Susan. Go ahead. Oh, Susan, you're muted.
He attacked the disabled and the women and the children that were at the back of the march. They couldn't keep up with the more able-bodied.
Right. Amalek, who has become kind of the prototype of the enemy against the enemy of the Jewish people, attacked in the most cruel way possible. And this is from the book of Exodus that we're in, but the part that gets quoted this Shabbat is from the recounting of it. Don't forget Amalek, this person, but really Amalek is understood to be a people. It's a nameless, faceless people, although it uses the word he here. So we don't know a lot about Amalek, but what do we know? As Susan just said, Amalek did the most cruel thing possible. Not only did Amalek attack the people while they were wandering through the wilderness and tired and exhausted. And remember, they were slaves, and so they were already had a rough life. But there are hundreds of thousands of them wandering, and he attacked the most vulnerable. Just come to the rear of the pack, take those who are in the rear. So like Susan said, the women and the weak, most likely. Cruel, right? So I'm gonna read to you again what it says and think about for a moment why it's so important to remember. Zachor, remember what Amalek did. After you left Egypt, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary. Really, like all of you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. So what is so particularly cruel about that?
Well, it's evil, pure and simple. And I think with the October 7th attack, my first thought was this is Amalek.
Right.
Yeah, these weren't debilitated, old people or whatever, but it was evil for the sake of evil.
It was
They're saying this is for
really evil. It is really hard to read this right now. And this is our second year post October 7th coming to this. It is very difficult to read this without thinking about October 7th. And I will tell you, I was in Israel in November of 2023 on a rabbinic group, and I was at Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and I stood on one level, it's the opposite of what Amalek attacked, right? I was standing in the young people's village, right? The part that the little neighborhood, they call it a neighborhood, it's really a section of the kibbutz that's closest to the fence, which is where all the young people have these tiny, if you want to call them apartments, it's a generous word for it, tiny little independent living quarters. This is their first entry into adulthood, independent adulthood, and they were the ones that were attacked most initially and the most brutally. And then I think about those kids at the Nova Festival who were young and vibrant, will never be the same, but also were at the end of an all-night party and were probably at their most vulnerable for lots of different reasons, right? So it's pure evil. Yes. Ben, what were you going to say? Even though I then went on and said a lot more.
Uh, Thank you, Rabbi. I just had a question. I seem to remember at one point studying that when the Jews marched through the 40 years, that they put the injured in the front, not or the lame in the front, not in the back. Am I remembering that correctly? Or and sort of
Well,
why would they do?
the other place where the order of the marching comes up is in the division of the tribes. So the tribes, the structure that was ultimately developed as they were wandering through the desert, through the wilderness, helped protect everybody because it wasn't just a mass of bodies, it was a mass of this tribe in this place and a mass of that tribe in that place. So there was a little bit more human connection that helped them not lose the vulnerable. But that comes later in the narrative because remember, where this happens in the Torah is way back in Exodus. The tribal divisions come later. So yes, maybe they learn. I haven't really thought about it that way. They learned, right, from their experience to help protect themselves. Okay, so here we have the evil Amalek, which is maybe a person, maybe a people, and maybe just a nameless, faceless enemy. I don't want to tip my cards too much, but I will let you know that it is widely understood and commented on that Amalek was a progenitor of Haman. Haman is a descendant of Amalek. So we see the connection. Okay, so that's the context, but I want to go back to the most confusing, confounding verse in much of the Torah, if not the whole Torah. And I don't know if anybody else was confused by it, but we're going to see. This last verse, verse 19, this one right here. Therefore, when your God, Adonai, grants you safety from all your enemies around you, right? When you are through the trauma of the moment, in the land that your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, this part, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. What's strange about that?
We blot out the name of Haman.
Roggers, boo. Right? So there's a similarity there. Blot out the name of Amalek. Don't forget. Forget Amalek. Don't forget. Don't forget to forget Amalek.
Well, it's a contradiction because because you're remembering to forget. That kind of you have to bring up his name in order to wipe it out. I mean, like,
Set a reminder to forget.
yes.
Think about your own experiences. It's to remember to forget. Usually it's the other way. We forget to remember.
Right.
Right? But here there's an intentionality to it. Now, I want to pause for a moment and distinguish where the way in Jewish eyes, especially when we're looking at Torah text, although the Torah doesn't talk about the other half of this, there is a clear difference in our tradition between memory and history. Right? I mean, it's another whole conversation about how and when we do or do not look at the Torah as history, right? But the difference between memory and history is that history is on the outside. Memory is on the inside, right? And what is the commandment that we get more than any other in the Torah? The command to remember. And we're going to come to that in a moment. But this is particularly confounding. Anybody want to try and make sense out of it? Why does the Torah say this? Blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. And by the way, that under heaven, the early commentators said, you got to wipe out the memory from even the animals. Get rid of it all across the board. Don't forget. Anybody want to try to make sense out of this? Mona, and I want to introduce you all to Mona. Mona is my old friend from Redondo Beach. Go ahead, Mona.
Happy to be here. I think I hear it as they want you to blot out the person, but remember the evil deed so it doesn't happen again.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. Any other thoughts? Or is it just doesn't make sense? It's too confusing. Go ahead, Ron.
I think it makes sense because it's like a grudge match. You block out things that you don't want to have going through your mind all the time. But you kind of have to remember who did it to you.
Yes. Yes. This reminds me of Simon Wiesenthal's book, The Sunflower. People familiar with The Sunflower? Or Simon Wiesenthal, for those who aren't familiar, tells his own story during the Holocaust, where he is called to, where a Jew, one of the Nazi soldiers, is sent to go find a Jew. It happens to be Simon Wiesenthal, who gets found, and to go into a hospital to the deathbed of a Nazi soldier who petitions his forgiveness. A Jew, any old Jew, upon his deathbed, a Nazi soldier is begging for forgiveness. And it turns, and he tells the story and then stops the story. And there's a whole series of commentaries by different thinkers about forgetting and forgiving, right? So, but the Torah, it's Shabbat Zachor. It's the Shabbat of memory. The Torah doesn't say forgive Amalek. It has nothing to do with that. So much so just blot it out. Blot out the name. And so to Mona's point, maybe this is blot out the name of Amalek. And so we actually do. I want to show you something. And I don't know if people are familiar with this custom. So I'm going to show you a picture. Do you see this image in the middle? That is, and I'll read the text of it in a moment. Everybody see that?
Can you make the text any bigger?
I sure can. Hold on one
Thank
second.
you.
Yeah, hold on one second. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So, but I want to look at this image right now. This is the text of, it looks like Torah text, right? And you can see this, what's it called? The scratching, the lines that are that are carved into the parchment. This is the Hebrew word Amalek, written by a scribe, a person who writes a Torah scroll, and then it's crossed out. It's blotted out. The name of Amalek is blotted out. And then there's this little commentary up above from that is an explanation of how the whole book, this whole work, is an explanation about how some of our different customs came about. And this is what they say about this image. When Rabbi Heshiel tested a new quill, right, for writing a Torah scroll, he would write either the word Amalek or the word Haman, and would then cross out the name in order to fulfill the commandment of you shall blot out the name of Amalek. So, has anybody ever seen that before? Okay, so this is a real thing. When a scribe is sitting down to start writing a new Torah, he or she, the custom is just that. Write the word Amalek and cross it out. And that's how they know if they're ready to start going, if the ink is properly dispensing. So I don't know about you, but when I write something, I write things so that I don't forget them. And I mean, I have all these notepads all over. Don't forget to do this. Don't forget to do that. This is this contrary thing. And I would offer that it's supposed to feel strange because there is a desire. I would offer a very real human desire on one level to forget things, right? But we can't really forget. And all of this I'm saying as on a communal level, right? A peoplehood level. Another layer to this conversation is how real memory loss is in individuals. And we can come to that if you want later, but at the moment, this is a question about communal memory. And what do we do with it? What do we do with it? As a people, we would, on one level, agree, disagree, after I say this, love to forget what Amalek did, pure evil. On one level, we would love to forget what Haman did, pure evil. On one level, on every level, I would love to forget October 7th, pure evil, and go on and on and on about all of the evil that has befallen the Jewish people over the course of our history, I'll call it that, or in our collective memory. Agree or disagree? What do you think? Would you like to forget those things or not?
But
Go ahead, Cindy.
I'm just finding it kind of in present day where I'm in Santa Monica and life is so completely normal here and was quite soon, as soon as the smoke got a little bit better, things opened. I was evacuated. We returned home. We could drink our water. I had some air, but life is completely normal here. And 5 minutes away in the Palisades, it's not. And I kind of go about my life not thinking about it. And then all of a sudden I remember that 5 minutes away, there's disaster. And it's like all of a sudden my life gets disrupted again. So sometimes the not thinking about it, you can deal with your life. And then all of a sudden when you remember, then there's like personal trauma again.
Right. Right. It's a lot more convenient to just move right along.
Because it could have been us.
Right. I mean, you were evacuated. You were right there.
But I'm thinking, like the Holocaust, had my grandparents not come here, it would have been me in my family, my parents. And, if I was in the Exodus, maybe I would have been at the back, and I would have been a straggler.
That's right. But you weren't in the Exodus and you live in Santa Monica, not the Palisades, and your grandparents did make the move. And so, thank God, in each of these cases, it's close enough to feel it and distant and remote enough to remove yourself from it so that you can go about your life, right? Okay, Merle, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, back to October 7th. That was Gabby's bat mitzvah.
I remember.
And Gabby's comment to everyone when they started asking the rabbi questions, because it happened the night before, rabbis was very clear about, we're not going to make that a part of the bat mitzvah. And it's not that we want to forget it, but we don't want to discuss it till we know more. Gabby's comment was, it was an incredible day for me and my family and my friends. And it wasn't the worst day on earth, and we have to go on living our lives. And that's kind of how I look at right now. I've got the CCAR meeting with I'm co-chair of the Friends of the CCAR, and there are people that aren't coming to the meeting, co-chair of the Friends of the CCAR. I've got some people on the Friends that told me they're not coming because they're afraid to fly because of what's happening. So, I mean, I think with all of this, the reminder to forget is that we have to go on with the lives we're living And we have to remember, like I said earlier, the people and what they did, but we have to go on and live our lives and not panic constantly.
And that, you're absolutely right. And that raises the ultimate question, which is, what is the purpose? What do we do with our memory? Sometimes it's really tempting to forget, but really the question of whether we remember whether we forget is not the question. And again, I'm talking about as a people. The question, and Judaism has a lot to say about this, is what do we do with our memory, shared memory? Susan, go ahead.
So that's essentially what I was going to ask. It's not to dwell on it, on that, but to be able to recognize evil. And I think there's a distinction too between evil and natural disasters. Evil, even I looked up evil, it's not when you get cancer or when there's a hurricane or a fire. That's not deliberate intentionality. That's nature. Evil is created by human beings. And I think the memory that we're not to forget is we have to remember that there's evil in the world and not to totally do the kumbaya. We're all the same, because we're not. There is the Yetzer Hara, an evil impulse, and that can take over a whole people, which we saw with the Nazis in Germany.
That's right. And that really is, in many ways, the not kid-friendly version of the story of Purim. That's why we're reading. That's why these verses about Amalek are always on the Shabbat prior to Purim, right? Guess what? There was evil at the time of Amalek. There was evil at the time of Haman, and evil is related, right? I mean, I think there's a message in that too. But there has always been some evil. That's what we have to remember. It is our responsibility, a collective, again. And it's not enough. So what I want to share with you, we're going to look at another text, a much more contemporary text in a moment, that has to do with what we do with this memory. What's the purpose of it for us as Jews? But go ahead, Merle. Sorry.
If it's not kid friendly, for my whole life, we've had Purim carnivals, we've had Purim plays, and our temple here next week is having an early Purim spiel and a late Purim spiel, partially because of the space, but also we know that the families with a lot of kids, and the kids will come in costumes and everything else, will be there for the early one. But if it's not kid friendly, why do we push to make it a family event?
I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad you clarified. I think this is one of many things in our tradition that has to exist on multiple levels, because the end of the story is very much not kid friendly. In fact, we keep joking here, next Friday night at Glazer, we're doing Purim Shabbat that is a family friendly. It's not a kid service, but it's a Purim Shabbat for everyone. And then we're joking, the Choosing Judaism alumni group, the adults only, are gonna have dinner afterwards, and we're telling people, we're kind of joking, if you want to hear how the story actually ends, go with that, right? But there are parts of this, and maybe this goes to our earlier conversation, the essence of the story, there could not be anything more kid or everybody friendly, right? Be proud to be Jewish, be proud of who you are, and don't let evil stand in your way, right? That is a great message, regardless of how old you are. It's a message we all need to hear. But if it's only that, we're missing the full picture. Go ahead, Cindy.
So how much are the kids hearing they tried to kill us because we're Jewish?
You
As
mean
part of the Purim story?
Life in general?
Yeah.
Wait, do you mean Purim or life?
Purim.
They hear all except the end where No.
Yeah, I know what happens
The
after
end
when
of
they
the
kill,
story.
but
So, but they do hear it. They can, because it's important. It's important. And the other piece that's family friendly or child that's really important for children, I think, is yes, and this will tie into our next text. Of course, part of being Jewish is understanding that having the memory, sharing in the collective memory, but it's not easy to be Jewish. It never has been. And we celebrate. We don't let that get in our way. So this is the I believe healthy tension of Purim and in truth of so much of Jewish life. But the story of Purim cannot be the only piece of our collective memory that any of us, kids or adults, hear. And that's where this next text is going to come into play. So are people familiar with Yossi Klein Halevi? So some are, some are not. If you're a reader, podcast listener, you should be. He is, I mean, he's one of my personal heroes, but he is a contemporary scholar and philosopher who is, among other things, one of the heads of the scholarship at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and is just has an amazing read on contemporary Israeli society. And I think it was last year, he wrote this piece about memory. And so I'm going to share it about Jewish memory. And this is what he says. A healthy people knows how to set its priorities of anxiety. It knows how to focus first on imminent threat. Yet a healthy people also knows that it cannot afford to allow even immediate threat to serve as pretext for denying long-term dangers. I want to read that last line again. We cannot allow even immediate threat to serve as a pretext for denying long-term dangers. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing. Can we unpack just that line again? Anybody want to try and make sense out of that line?
You might have the current situation with Gaza.
someone was
Okay. So what's he say? What's it saying though, with regard
and other situations for an immediate, even in the truce, in the ceasefire, truce or whatever, we still have to look at the long-term goal. If we get I mean, and I think that's a conundrum that Israel faced too. How much do you give in for not actually looking at the long term and wiping out Hamas, or at least disemboweling them?
Great. So we need to remember that we're running a marathon, not a sprint. And
Right. Yeah.
remember collective memory again. Remember as a community that this is our memory as a Jewish people can never be just about what's in front of us at any given time. And therefore the choices that we make that are based in our collective memory cannot be based on what's happening in any given moment. As is evidenced by the news cycle, right? I mean, I don't know what was yesterday. I don't know what's tomorrow. It changes so quickly. Mona.
And don't we also, as Jews, have a tend to remember things and be historians and tell stories in the sense that it's not just the memory now or the last, my generation, our generation. We want to know that the Jews, we read the Torah to say, no, this is our collective shared memory for thousands of years. And
Yes.
not every group or religion does that as much as I think I was taught it.
That's great. Yes, that's exactly what Torah study is. And we come to it every year, over and over and over again. We come to it in the Torah, and we also come to it in our holiday cycle. So with that, let me read a little bit more. Here we go. Okay, he continues. Jewish history speaks to our generation in the voice of two.
Wait a minute, you're on the wrong, are you on the
No, it's the
right?
same thing. So,
Where is Jewish history?
oh, I'm sorry, it's showing something else. I
You're
shared the
showing
wrong.
your previous one.
Sorry, don't say. Sorry, I have too many windows open. There we go. Let me try again. This one. Okay.
There.
Jewish history speaks to our generation in the voice of two biblical commands to remember. The first voice commands us to remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt. And the message of that command is don't be brutal. What's that talking about? Think of what holiday is around the corner. Passover.
Exodus.
The Exodus, right? The first voice commands us to remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt. That comes back in our Passover Seder. And the message of the Passover Seder is according to him, don't be brutal. The second voice commands us to remember how the tribe of Amalek attacked us without provocation while we were wandering in the desert. And the message of that command is don't be naive. We have both. And this is where he brings it together. The first command is the voice of Passover, of liberation. The second is the voice of Purim, commemorating our victory over the genocidal threat of Haman, a descendant of Amalek. And this is where, think about your own personal inclinations. Passover Jews, a type, right? Passover Jews are motivated by empathy with the oppressed. Purim Jews are motivated by alertness to threat. Both are essential. One without the other creates an unbalanced Jewish personality, a distortion of Jewish history and values. Both are essential. One without the other creates an unbalanced Jewish personality, a distortion of Jewish history and values. Any thoughts or reactions to the Purim Jew versus the Passover? I want to make sure everybody followed. So let's go back. What is he saying? What does somebody who is inclined to be a Passover Jew, we'll start with that, a Passover Jew, what does memory do? What's the function of memory for a Passover Jew?
I think he said it very well. It's empathy, it's concern for the others, for the poor. It says the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and one would say the poor as well. The other one is don't be all empathy for everything. And there's one woman who spoke at the temple one time who said she forgives Mangala. And am I off now? She forgives the Nazis. She was in a concentration camp. So that's probably good for her own psyche, so she doesn't dwell on it, but it's not a good message, I think, to communicate. I think it was Eva Korn. I don't remember the name, but too much empathy is not good. It needs a balance, but you can't be naive to see evil under your foot, or at your back door. So there's a saying too, if you're, I think it was from the Talmud, if people who are gracious to evil end up being evil to the good, or but people who are kind to evil end up being evil to the kind.
Yep.
So there needs to be a balance or a tension between the two.
This is a natural tension when we keep in mind the extent of Jewish memory. It is not, the Purim story is not the sum total of Jewish memory. And by the way, neither is the story of the Exodus. But I'll tell you, it's a lot more pleasant to be able to say, it's a lot easier to get up in front of a group of kids and tell the story of the Exodus without having to put on the filter, right? The age appropriate filter, and say, yes, guess what? Guess what Judaism teaches us? Judaism, Jewish memory teaches us to be good people. And we don't oppress the stranger because we know what it's like to be a stranger. We've been there. That's what Judaism, Jewish memory teaches us. Great. It is true. And Jewish memory teaches us as well that there is evil out there and we can't be naive to it. And I'm not talking about just Jewish, we know this is not just a reminder from Amalek or from Haman. It is, we live it in our days. So which do you incline to? Are you a past? I mean, granted, he gives the answer, right? We all, on an intellectual level, ought to do our best to find the balance between those two. But the right balance is different for, I believe, every one of us. And what we incline to today might be different than what we inclined to a year ago or when we were children. So what's your inclination? What motivates you? What part of Jewish memory is what motivates you in life to live as a Jew?
I think for me, it's all of it. I think one thing, the Exodus is in the Torah, but Esther, the book of Esther, is a writing, isn't it? In the writings?
Yep, it's in the Ketuvim.
And the scrolls. So that in it could to be, but that came later. That's a post Torah
Right.
writing. So it's another generation and also another culture because it was Persian culture in which it occurred. So, but I think it's all relevant, and I think we can do both.
Anybody find it hard to be, specifically as we live as Jewish people who inherit this memory? It's, again, it's personal. It's not history. It's memory. It's personal. Which do you find driving you, let's just say today?
Well, Purim is more fun. And just as Merle said, it was fun dressing in a costume.
Isn't that ironic that that message is, I mean, that's when we have the carnivals, when we are commanded to drink so much that we can't tell the difference between the phrase, blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman, that this is the fun holiday.
Yeah. I didn't agree with, I never understood drink so much that you don't know the difference. And I think some of the Orthodox are not say more observant are putting some brakes on that because, or not anymore, Cindy, but they're recognizing some of it, that it's not healthy to be in that situation.
Right. Merle, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just gonna say that the balance is really necessary in order to have empathy for whoever we're going to have empathy for. We have to be alert and recognize where different people are coming from, though we may not agree with where those people might be, those who we're trying to figure out. We may not be alert. We may not be able to figure out how to handle them, and how can we have empathy towards some of these people who are really difficult people, for I'm trying to say it nicely. But
well, and I think the question maybe you're asking, and this was kind of, in Simon Wiesenthal's book as well, the question is, are there limits? Are there limits to our ability to be kind, or to where those two parts of our memory come together? Are there places where it needs to stop?
I mean, sometimes it's just really hard to figure out, my mother always said, you have to be kind, and you have to, again, it's like whenever we say prayers, especially like at high holidays, when we're saying prayers that we have to be forgiving. Sometimes I sit there and I think, do I really want to forgive some of these people? And how can I forgive them and not feel horrible about forgiving them, if that makes sense?
And I would offer that the answer to those questions is, at least on an intellectual level, much more challenging than the question about forgetting, right? And it's amazing that these examples come up naturally, the line between forgiving and forgetting. They're two different things, but they're so interconnected in our life experience, right? So what about forgetting evil? Blot out the memory of the evil. Maybe it comes back to what Mona said. Don't let the people continue to hold us, to keep power over us, but lest we forget the deeds. We have to learn from our past, right?
I don't think you have to forgive everything. I don't even think that's in Judaism. There's a sense of justice in Judaism, and it's a very justice show you pursue. Remember that, Merle?
That is a whole, yes, there's a lot to be said about justice versus compassion and where they overlap and where they don't.
Yeah.
You're right.
Exactly.
That's the forgiveness piece. But it's so interesting that this so often comes right into line with the forgetting piece, even though they're two different things. But again, on one level, I would love to forget that October 7th happened. And on one level, maybe a lot more remote, I would love to forget what Haman did. And even more remote, because it's further in the rear view mirror, I would love to forget what Amalek did. But as Jews, we inherit this collective memory. So forgetting isn't really an option. We have to remember to forget. I mean, we can talk in circles around it, right? But there's something about this that challenges us to not just about remembering or forgetting, but to thinking about what the memory does, right? Because for the Passover Jew, or at Passover time, we are reminded over and over and over about what the purpose of that memory is, right?
Well, there's also something
because you were a stranger. The memory is that you were a stranger, but it's never just the command that comes back over and over and over again, never just says, remember you were a stranger, or remember you were slaves, or remember that, what Pharaoh did to you. It comes in the language is different each time, but it never stops at that. It always, always has the second piece. Therefore, make the world a better place. Be more human. Be kind, right? Take care of the vulnerable, the people who are marching at the back of your massive humanity. Take care of those people.
It's also about, I think it's not just, Yossi brought that out, we were strangers, but there are also so many other things in this. Remember the cruelty of the Egyptians. Negative, there is the cruelty in this world, but it's also a song of liberation, of freedom. And it's also a hang on to God, that remember God. God brought you out of Egypt. So there are all these other more adult variables than the Purim story, which could be a a play, which is often dramatized because that's what, good guys and bad guys and courageous. But I think there's a lot more in that memory that we do at the Seder, at Passover, not just empathy. And then next year in Jerusalem, we're Jews. And
that's the hope piece, right? We put ourselves into it, and we should see ourselves as if we ourselves went forth out of Egypt. And next year in Jerusalem, there's hope that it will be complete that it will be better next year. Cindy, go ahead.
I keep seeing or thinking about the connection to saying Kaddish, that part of the remembering is not just what happened, but remembering the dead who were the victims of the Holocaust, the remembering those who were the victims of October 7th as part of saying Kaddish.
Yes. And we say we remember, right? It's not history. History is on the outside. And you're right. We take that responsibility very seriously as Jews, that we actively have to be part of that memory. Yes, the Kaddish is deeply personal for mourners, individual mourners, but even in very traditional settings in synagogues, when we say the Kaddish, in traditional synagogues, it is only the people who are the mourners who say the words of the Kaddish, most of the words of the Kaddish, but the community says amen, 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 to remind the mourners that they're not alone, right? So that is memory, right? Us, even where it's that line between the personal and the collective, even where it's deeply personal, the community is there to hold on to that, to those lessons with the mourner. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mona, you're muted.
So the collective memory is important because it's a learning for all generations not to be forgotten. But it's different than a personal memory. And I have a family member who, when he got older and had dementia, remembered his time in the Holocaust. He remembered his time in Europe. And the personal memory, whether it's a trauma like that or any trauma, personal trauma, can be devastating to live with and remember and not let go of. Can just be personally devastating. Different than the communal memory, the collective memory.
Well, because the devastation, that's a great word. The devastation often is another way of describing our desire on some level to forget. And we know that even if an individual does forget, it is a shared story, and therefore it belongs to all of us. And that's how we function as Jews. But it is directly connected to what motivates us. How the memory functions for us has a direct connection to how we live our lives, right? Do we walk around the world today, because I'm sure it's different than it will be tomorrow, or maybe not tomorrow, but do we walk around the world as Purim Jews, constantly looking around and knowing that there are people that we need to be on the defensive? Because guess what? We do need to be on the defensive to some level. Or do we walk around the world saying, you know what? This is amazing. Being Jewish, we were slaves in the land of Egypt. And because of that, we know how to be nicer and kinder and more human.
But after October 7th, a lot of us had to think, do we stop wearing our Jewish stars? I even for a minute thought, should I take the mezuzah off my door? I was nervous. So a lot of us had to rethink how outwardly present being Jewish we wanted to be.
That's absolutely correct. That is
But
absolutely correct. It
we're
puts us
also
right back
doing that
into
now.
the trauma that the Jewish people have known since the Exodus from Egypt.
We're
Sorry.
also doing that now with all the anti-Semitism talk and what's going on.
Right. So that's just being smart. And what's a decision for you might be different than a decision for somebody else. I talked to many people who were really tormented over the mezuzah question. Really, really tormented. Even more than wearing a Jewish star or a chai, you know, so, because taking a mezuzah off a door is actually removing it. It's not just not putting something on, it's removing torment. There were many, many people tormented by this because I think it was reopening something that we had naively thought wasn't as present. You
Well,
know,
especially after Michael Tushin's house was attacked.
Right.
It's like you have this label, this is a Jewish house. And
Right.
how vulnerable were we?
Right. So this is real, and God forbid that be the sum total of Jewish memory. That is not enough to, let's go back to the kids who are going to be gathered with their groggers next week, right? That fear, that Purim memory is not, God forbid that is the sum total of who we are as Jews. I believe that if that is the sum total of who we are, of our Jewish memory, of what's in mind, then we're letting the Amaleks of the world win, right? But if we can find that balance between being smart and knowing that, you know, we have to be thoughtful about putting a mezuzah up is not nothing, right? And we have to each make our own choice about what's right, but we're mindful that it marks our house as a Jewish house. A balance between that and let's make the world a better place, because guess what? We understand in our DNA as Jews that the world needs to be better, because guess what? It's been pretty screwed up since we were slaves in Egypt, right? That balance, which is different for every person, is ultimately, I believe, what we owe ourselves, what we owe Jewish memory. And the pendulum switches and it's the balance is different, but they need to both be there. And we can't set it and walk away. And so with this, I'm going to bring you a little bit from this week's, from the regular Torah portion. And the connection is we can't set it and walk away. We constantly have to be revisiting this. So this Shabbat, our regular Torah portion is Tetzaveh. Among other things, there's a whole description about the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, right? Now, Shabbat Zachor is not always this Torah portion. It's always around this part of the Torah, but I want to look specifically at one verse about the eternal light. And you shall further instruct, this is the very beginning of the Torah portion, Tetzaveh, you shall instruct or command, same word as mitzvah, the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly, laha'alo, to actively light the ner tamid, to actively light the ner tamid, or to regularly light the ner tamid, right? The Israelites are commanded to bring the finest oil for lighting the eternal light. Do it on a regular basis. So why do I bring this text? Because I have always been struck by the fact that the initial command about the eternal light, eternal, right? Tamid, eternal, is that they have to keep lighting it. So what's the takeaway? We can't set it and walk away. We have to constantly come back and bring the fuel, bring what we've got to offer, and we can't take anything for granted, including our own understanding about the role of how we live our Jewish memory. This is a continual effort that we need to constantly revisit as a people, and I would argue as individuals, because again, like I said, it's a little bit different for everyone. I had this conversation just a couple hours ago with a group of parents from our ECC and Browerman. And the difference between that, we had a similar conversation, and the parents of the 2-year-olds was very different from the parent who was talking about her teenager, right? It is continually revisiting it based on where we're at in our own lives, but also what's happening in the world around us. So with that, the command is to continue to rejoice, right? That's the other piece of it. We take the memory, and what's the ultimate command during this whole season of Purim? To rejoice. We can't crawl under, we ought not crawl under a rock, right? That's another way that the Amaleks of the world win. We have to continue to rejoice. And that's why it is a perfect holiday for kids. All right. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank
Either on
you.
Shabbat or hopefully at the installation on Sunday.
We'll see you Sunday for sure.
Travel safely. Shabbat
Thank
Shalom.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.